Okay, so those of you who have watched my prior videos will know that the whole allegation that the Jesuits were infiltrated by Jews, or that the Jews controlled the Jesuits um, throughout history or in modern times, I've completely refuted that. First, by the fact that the Jews were banned from the Jesuits for 350 years, and then that the Jesuits themselves were anti-Jewish in their magazine La Civiltà Cattolica. I've gone over that quite a few times. And also, I've refuted the argument by traditional Catholics and neo-Nazis that the Jews took over the Jesuits at Vatican II, because Vatican II, they will argue that the Jews took over the Vatican at Vatican II, and I've refuted that by showing that the Jesuits were behind Vatican II, not Jews. The Jesuits dominated that council. So anyways, I have been still refuting the allegation that Loyola was of Jewish ethnicity. I've also refuted that by showing anthropological citations in that regard. But here's an article that I've seen cited by these people to say that Loyola was Jewish, and it comes from this article redefininggod.com, and typical, has this same paragraph by Henry Macau about first Jesuits were crypto-Jews, Ignatius Loyola, crypto-Jew of occult Kabbalah, blah 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 blah. So, of course, the people spreading this, they don't even know that the Jesuits were anti-Jewish, the Jesuits banned Jews. They don't know about that, and if they do, they don't care, because their only mission is to assert that the Jews control everything, despite the evidence to the contrary. So, anyways, probably the most convincing thing on here, most of this is just saying how some of the early Jesuits were conversos, which, who cares? I mean, the Jesuits banned the conversos anyways. So, there's one thing here that says, was Ignatius really a crypto-Jew Mirado converso? Given the inherent bias of all historical narratives, to which narrative should we look to find the answer to this question? I decided that the surest way to confirm Ignatius's converso background was to look for admissions of it from Jesuits themselves, and looky what I found. And this is from a summary of a chapter of a book called Friends on the Way, Jesuits Encounter Contemporary Judaism, and this certain chapter was written by a Jesuit. It says, From Windfall to Fall, The Conversos in the Society of Jesus, by Mark Rastoin, S.J., Society of Jesus. This chapter discusses the Society of Jesus' acceptance of recruits from Jewish origin, or the so-called conversos, prior to 1593. This tolerance ended at the Fifth General Congregation in 1593. Yeah, see, they don't even care about this. They don't care that the Jesuits banned Jews from the Society of Jesus. They just completely ignore this, like it doesn't exist, and then say because a couple conversos, which by the way are not crypto-Jews. Conversos are not the same thing as crypto-Jews. Crypto-Jews are Marranos. Marranos, not the same thing as conversos. Marranos and crypto-Jews secretly practice their religion. Conversos, not necessarily. Two different things. So, this tolerance ended at the Fifth General Congregation in 1593 due to the combined efforts of the Spanish crown and the majority of Spanish Jesuits themselves. It reveals that several studies have found that the Society's founder and its first superior general, Ignatius Loyola, came from a converso family. and that he had wished he had been Jewish to have the honor of being from the same race as Jesus and the Virgin Mary. So let's go to this link. Yeah, so this is discussing this specific chapter from Windfall to Fall in this book, Friends on the Way. So I have gotten up that book, Friends on the Way. I found it on Google Books, and the whole chapter from Windfall to Fall, which is the first chapter, is available in its entirety. You're able to read the whole thing, and guess what? There's nothing in here about any studies showing Loyola to have been Jewish. So I don't know why it says that in this synopsis. My guess is that it's just a lie by the Jesuits to say that Loyola was Jewish so these people can have ammunition to use. And I feel the same way about Robert Merrick's book, The Jesuit Order as a Synagogue of Jews. I will switch to that tab later, and I'll show you how nothing in that book says that Loyola was a converso. Nothing. And he never says either, obviously, that any of the early Jesuit conversos were crypto-Jews. Nothing about that. But these people eat this stuff up. Like, this is their so-called definitive proof that the Jews control the Jesuits, when, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. Okay, so let's, I don't know any other way, really, to show you that there's nothing in this chapter regarding studies about Loyola being Jewish, that those studies are not included here. I don't know any other better way than to just read the chapter, so I will do that. Okay, this is the preface, introduction, and there's some informative things in here, so it won't be for just showing that the claims of the synopsis are not included. You'll learn some things about the Jesuits and how, well, you'll see. You'll learn some things, I think. So let's begin. From Windfall to Fall, the Conversos and the Society of Jesus. Mark Rastoin, S.J. Over the past 2 decades, historians have studied Ignatius Loyola's relations with the Jews. Their studies have demonstrated that Loyola was so favorably disposed towards them that he wished he had been Jewish, so he would have had the honor of being from the same race as Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Such sentiments reveal how much he differed from a Spanish culture in which hostility towards Jews and conversos grew steadily in the first half of the 16th century. And let me just stop. So he says he wished he were Jewish, so that that kind of throws their case off as well. But just because he was sympathetic towards Jews does not mean that the Jews infiltrated them, doesn't mean they controlled them. You know, the decree that forbid the Jews from being part of the Society of Jesus tested on strict blood purity, and Robert Merrick actually even says in an interview I've seen with him that that test for blood purity was stricter than the Nazis to determine Jewish ancestry. And also, none of the most important people in the establishment of the Jesuits were Jewish. Loyola was not a converso, which has been shown and which I will further show by reading this whole chapter and seeing that there's nothing that points to that. And secondly, Francis Borgia, who was Loyola's advisor and probably the #1 player in terms of getting the Jesuits established. He funded all of the printing of the spiritual exercises, and I believe he had um, talks with the Pope to influence the Pope to get the order approved, and Borgia also funded the early Jesuit colleges, etc. And then, of course, the last person who was most influential was the Pope, Pope Paul III. I believe his name was Alessandro Farnese. Obviously not a Jew. And Borgia was not a Jew either, as I've also shown. There are certain people who would like to think that, but they base that on rumors spread in Borgia's time to attack him because he had some enemies who didn't like him, so they just made up a lie that he was Jewish. Okay, so let's continue. It is also well known that Laenas, one of the first 10 companions, arguably the most outstanding after Ignatius and his successor as Father General, came from a converso family. Recent books on the history of the first Jesuits recall this particular feature of the society, its acceptance of recruits from Jewish origin. They also narrate how this tolerance ended at the Fifth General Congregation in 1593 due to the combined efforts of the Spanish crown and the majority of Spanish Jesuits themselves. Excuse me. The assembled fathers decreed, "The ministries of our society are exercised with greater fruit in the general quest for the salvation of souls in proportion to the distance. Ours are from those human situations that can prove offensive to others. Those, however, who are descended from parents who are recent Christians have routinely been in the habit of inflicting a great deal of hindrance and harm on the society, as has become clear from our daily experience." Before I go any further, let me make this a little bigger. Okay. The entire congregation then decided to decree, as is affirmed by the present decree, that in no case is anyone of this sort, that is to say, one of Hebrew or Saracen stock, henceforth to be admitted into the society. And if by error any such will have been admitted, he should be dismissed as soon as the impediment will have been shown to exist, at whatever time before profession it becomes known, after first notifying the Superior General and awaiting his reply. So, there you go. Jews banned from the Jesuits. The fathers offered an apostolic explanation for their decision. It was not necessary for the society to recruit its members from all races. Rather, the decree continued, "It is more suited to the greater glory of God and the more perfect pursuit of the end of it. The Society of Jesus proposes to itself that it possesses workers who are very acceptable to other nations throughout the world, and who might be more freely and reliably employed by the Church of God by those people whose good or ill will towards us, as Father Ignatius of happy memory says, has much influence to open or to keep closed out access to the divine service and the help of souls." The same congregation, after unnamed participants appealed for reconsideration, confirmed the decree. Nonetheless, some issues require further examination. Why did the conversos join the society? From which families did they come? Where did they work as Jesuits? Indeed, how many were there? What factors influenced their decisions to enter the society? What caused a decline in the number of conversos entering the society? In this short paper, I shall propose some tentative answers to those thorny questions. Why did the conversos join the society? To this question, a very short answer could easily be given. The society was the only order they could join. But it would be better to take a second look. The adoption of the statutes regarding limpeza de sangre reached their peak towards the end of the 1540s. In particular, all of Spain was influenced by the decision of Juan Martinez Gujeno, better known as Silesio, Archbishop of Toledo, to adopt the statutes and the eagerness with which he implemented them. Most religious orders had either already adopted their prohibitions or were in the process of doing so. On the contrary, Loyola directed the society to pursue an entirely different policy. He was not convinced that the rejection of conversos in any way served God. If a candidate was fit for the apostolic life as envisioned by the founder, no question of origin should hinder his entrance. On this Ignatius was adamant. Reporting on Ignatius's stormy conversation with the Archbishop of Toledo, the Jesuit Francisco de Villanueva said the proud Archbishop made it clear that he would consider admitting the society into his archdiocese only if it adopted the Limpieza de Sangre. Because the Archbishop had various objections to the society, including his convictions influenced by Dominican theologian Melchor Cano, that the spiritual exercises were heretical, and because, as Primate of Spain, his endorsement would facilitate the society's work in Spain, the offer was tempting, but Ignatius refused to accept any accommodation on this point. Not all Spanish Jesuits supported Loyola. Antonio de Arras, Loyola's cousin, frequent resident at the Spanish court, and the first provincial of Spain, strongly opposed the acceptance of conversos into the society. Despite his wide influence, Arras bowed to Loyola, even though he remained unconvinced by the arguments. Another influential Jesuit with tendencies opposed to Ignatius's policy was Simão Rodrigues, provincial of Portugal, and was one of the first 10 companions. At the end of 1551, he ordered that conversos not be accepted into the society in India, and did so in such a way as to give the impression that the command had come from Ignatius himself. Francis Xavier implemented the instruction for a brief period until a counter-order arrived from Rome. Between 1548 and 1558, because of Loyola's resolution, the doors of the society remained open to conversos. The attitude of Juan de Avila into the society testifies to Loyola's openness. A major religious leader in Spain and widely regarded as a saint during his lifetime, Juan de Avila evangelized Andalusia, the south of Spain, which had been reconquered in 1492. He had numerous disciples, many of whom were like himself conversos. On the verge of founding a new religious order, Juan de Avila instead wrote to Ignatius Loyola upon hearing of the society and its policies. The understanding between the two was immediate. Consequently, many of Avila's disciples entered the society. 3 of the more famous disciples were the influential author Gaspar de Loarte, who worked mostly in Italy, Diego de Guzman, who also worked in Italy, and Luis de Santander, who joined as a priest in 1554. Both Loarte and Santander were conversos. A trickier question is the motivation of the conversos for joining the Jesuits. Did they join because they wished to enter religious life, or did they specifically want to join the Jesuits? What or who influenced them to join? 2 elements must be distinguished. First, why were there so many priests among the conversos entering the Jesuits? And second, what were the main features of their spirituality, if we can identify them? Before trying to provide an answer to these questions, we must examine more closely the societal identity of the conversos. It would be misleading to think of the conversos as a unified body. First, there were great differences between the Portuguese and the Spanish conversos, and even within Spain, as the Spanish historian Dominguez Ortiz noted, there was a difference between north and south. Conversos from Aragon, Catalonia, and a part of Castilla La Vega were much more integrated into society than those from the south. Their number was smaller, and they often came from families who had converted decades before the ordeal of 1492. Many more of them had contracted marriages with Cristianos Viejos before the statutes were effectively implemented. Dominguez Ortiz noted the paucity of cases of Judeanetes before the Inquisition in the north in comparison with the southern cities of Seville, Cordoba, and Toledo. Generally speaking, Spanish conversos came from old Christian families. Almost all came from the big urban centers, for example, Juan de Polanco, Toledo, Acosta, and very often were from powerful and rich merchant families. Their families encouraged university studies, and many of the first Spanish recruits had graduated very successfully, Lyons, Toledo, Alfonso de Pisa. Many were already priests when they joined the society, Luarte, Pedro Ramon Santander, Toledo, or deacons, Henriques. Conversos who entered as laymen were quickly ordained and sent to teach or to exercise important offices within the society. Some, for example Acosta, Toledo, and Pisa, were among the first instructors at the Colegio Romano. Some, for example Polanco, Luarte, Santander, and Ramon, were professed of the four vows. The situation was quite different in Portugal. Conversos there came from families much more attached to Judaism. Many Portuguese Jews had accepted forced exile from Spain in 1492 in order to remain Jews. Among the 20 or so conversos mentioned by name by Father Wiki, one, Gomez Vaz, had two grandparents who had been burnt at the stake. Almost all came from very humble social backgrounds. The Jews who had emigrated to Portugal from Spain were generally the most observant and the poorest. There were those who had been able to sell their small shops and possessions in the 4 months allowed by the King of Spain. Portuguese conversos were accordingly usually poorer than Spanish conversos. In Portugal, almost half the conversos entered the society as brothers: Fernando de Navarra, Gaspar Rodriguez, Luis de Almeida, even if some were ordained after some years of apostolic work in Japan or in India. For example, Bartolomeu dos Santos, Antonio Fernandez, Antonio Diaz. When they pronounced vows, they were often spiritual coadjutors. Rarely were they appointed as rectors or superiors. If they did assume such positions, there were extenuating circumstances, such as terrible persecutions, Pedro Gomez in Japan in 1590, or because there was no other candidate. Nonetheless, even in these instances, their appointments sometimes provoked tensions within the community. As early as December of 1574, Alessandro Valignano, Jesuit visitor to the Far East, asked that no more conversos be sent to India because there were then so many that the society was falling from favor among the Portuguese in Asia. The door was beginning to close against the conversos. Where did they work? We have seen that Ignatius was ready to admit that in Spain and Portugal the popular shame attached to the conversos made it difficult for them to work in their homeland. He suggested, in case their origin was known, that they be sent to work in another country. The missionary impetus of the society provided both a wonderful occasion for the conversos to live and work freely outside their homeland and a powerful appeal to their authentic Christian missionary feelings. But unfortunately, as we have already seen, the Portuguese colonies quickly became as hostile to them as the homeland they had left. This situation prompted superiors to request a change of policy. Some conversos, for example Polanco, Toledo, Luarte, Pisa, worked in Italy. Others went to America, like Acosta, to Germany, Fernando de Jaen, or Italy in northern Europe, to the Middle East, Giovanna Battista Alaino, and obviously to India and Japan. Some entered the society in those non-European countries after having worked as merchants or doctors: Almeida Narbona, painters, Manuel Alvarez, or musicians, Antonio Bello. In cases where they were already in their 30s or 40s, they joined as brothers. As Spanish and Portuguese institutions took root in the colonies, and with the progressive development of the Inquisition overseas and the entrance into the society of more sons of the noble families, Jesuit authorities in Spain and Portugal became increasingly reluctant to admit conversos. In 1584, the Portuguese provincial congregation decreed that it would admit no more conversos. That decree was not sudden. From the end of the 1560s, pressure to forbid admission to conversos was strong throughout the society, but especially in Portugal. By 1575, Italy and Eastern Europe were the only possible fields of activity for conversos. But even within Italy, perhaps because of the increased presence and influence of Spanish Jesuits during the generalates of Diego Lainez and Francis Borgia, this door was also closing. By the death of Lainez, most of the professors at the Collegio Romano and more than half the professed Jesuits in Italy were Spaniards, creating a growing resentment among the Italian Jesuits. Why then did the formal decree of the Fifth General Congregation come only in 1593? The text of the constitutions and the clear will of the first superior generals, especially the clearly expressed desire of Ignatius, were a powerful barrier to any change. As soon as he heard of the decree, Pedro de Ribeira, a close companion during Ignatius's life, protested strongly, arguing that this decree was a shameful betrayal of Ignatius's manifest will. The decree eliminated an important sign in the society's independence from the Spanish crown and other earthly powers. This was only one of the first battles in a war that would last till the royal decree of March of 1767, which expelled all Jesuits from Spanish territories. Then many old charges, for example, Jesuit conspiracies against the king, the wealth and power of the society, the illegitimacy of the fourth vow, and Jesuit ambitions in South America, some of these charges date back to the 16th century controversies, were again arrayed against the society. Jesuit desire to win more respect in the Iberian world resulted in the society's capitulation in the face of powerful adversaries. The society hoped to integrate itself with the king and thus protect its apostolates within Spain. Juan de Avila had predicted that only two issues could possibly destroy the society: the acceptance of too many ill-suited candidates and the adoption of limpieza de sangre. Ribeira, in his defense of the society's traditional openness, reminded Jesuits of Avila's prophecy. Perhaps we should interpret the suppression of this society as a belated fulfillment of the prophecy. How many conversos were there during Acavia's tenure as general? It is obviously almost impossible to answer this delicate question precisely. In Spain, the presence of so many conversos prompted critics to disparage the society as an order of Jews. Even if the question of limpieza had been asked prior to admission, the answer was usually not recorded and preserved. Moreover, surnames cannot always provide clues because some conversos had very common Spanish names or, indeed, had changed their residences and their names. We can even note changes of names after someone had joined the society. Geronimo Concha became Coenza and Fernão de Narbona became Núñez. A Jesuit's origins usually became a matter for concern only after rumors began to circulate. These rumors prompted the Jesuit superiors either to defend him or to transfer him. As long as there were no suspicions and no complaints, there was no need to raise the issue of someone's origins. To limit publicity, Jesuits used coded language or foreign expressions. Antonio Ayres referred to conversos as la gentry virac in his plea to Loyola that the society adopt the statutes of limpieza. Viriac is the Basque word for new. Father Wiki demonstrated how letters from India sometimes used Greek letters within the Latin text to conceal a Jesuit's origins or employed the antiphrasis Viscaño, Basque people. The last requires some explanation. It was well known that the only region of Spain with scarcely any conversos was the Basque country, as Ignatius recalled during his trial by the Spanish Inquisition. Now, that's interesting because Loyola was a Basque, so this just says that there were hardly any Basque conversos, and But that's just another point showing that these people don't know what they're talking about. Thus, the description of a Jesuit whose name clearly revealed that he was from another part of Spain as a Vizcaño indicated that he was a converso. It is as if one were to say today, the problem of Patrick Murphy is his Italian origin. the reader initiated in the code will automatically supply Irish origin. Despite these problems, we can approximate the number of conversos within the society. If we consider, for example, the Spanish Jesuits mentioned by John W. O'Malley, S.J., in the First Jesuits, approximately a fifth, 8 of 37, were conversos. So only a fifth of the first Jesuits were conversos, according to this book. This would surely be a maximum in those first years of the society. According to Father Wiki, approximately 1/10, 20 of 197, of the Jesuits in the Indian province in 1565 were conversos. All but 2 were Portuguese. The 2 Spanish provinces most concerned with the issue were Toledo and Andalusia. The first had attracted many university students immediately after their graduation. The second accepted many of Juan de Avila's disciples after he and Loyola had reached an agreement in 1555. O'Malley has pointed out that approximately 25% of candidates for the society in Spain in 1562 entered at the Jesuit house in Alcalá. Around the same period, Alcalá and 2 other university cities, Salamanca and Valencia, produced nearly 50% of Spanish vocations. Because many conversos attended the universities, the last social organizations within Spain to enforce the statutes, and many more were among Avila's disciples, some candidates for the society must have been conversos. But how many? If we extrapolate from O'Malley's data, nearly 20% of the provinces should be conversos. If we use Wiki's 10%, there were 165 Jesuits in the province of Toledo in 1565 and 176 in Andalusia. That would make 20 or so men for each province. The proportion should not be surprising. Not only were conversos very numerous in the cities where the society was establishing itself, but they belonged to the social classes attracted to the society. They came from very large and pious families. Consider the following 3 examples. Diego Lainez entered the society, as did 2 of his brothers. One of his sisters was a Clarice. Estrain cites the Acosta family, which gave 5 sons to the society, and the Duenes, which gave 4. They were all from the College of Medina del Campo. Now we can return to the first question. Why were conversos so enthusiastically drawn to this new order? Of course, as we mentioned above, conversos had few options, since the majority of religious orders and congregations denied them access. But conversos did not simply select the society by default. There were aspects of Jesuit life and spirituality that appealed to them. Conversos strongly resented Spanish obsession with el punto de honor and wanted to return to the spirit of the gospel. Eager to demonstrate the depth of their faith in the face of the suspicions of the old Christians, conversos often became priests and nuns. They encouraged contemporary spiritual revivals, including that of the Alumbrados. Aspects of their cultural, intellectual, and spiritual background disposed them towards the Society of Jesus. And I just want to pause for another moment. The Alumbrados were not influenced by Jews or Jewish theology. The Alumbrados, there's a certain book by a scholar named Richard Woods. I believe the book is called Spirituality Through the Ages, or Christian Spirituality Throughout the Ages. And he shows in that book that the Alumbrados, their spiritual practices, or quote-unquote theology, was based on Catholic mysticism. Basically, a certain sort of monasticism that developed in the 11th century or so by a man named Meister Eckhart. He was a Dominican priest, but he actually became condemned by the Catholics because his positions were even more radical than that of the monastic Dominicans. So anyways, the Alumbrados, their spirituality was based on Catholic mysticism. So continuing. The reaction of Juan de Avila is especially revealing in that regard. And the proof of it is that those men who joined as priests were among those who best embodied the Ignatian spirit, even if they were already mature when entering. We need only mention G. de Luarte F. Vasquez or L. de Santander. In contrast, some Spaniards who joined as laymen took much more time to discover the spirit of the society, as we see with A. de Oviedo, A. Arras, or even Francis Borgia. The Conversos represented a fantastic opportunity for the young order, a windfall that Ignatius was happy to receive. They provided a good number of talented scholars who helped to establish the fame of the Collegio Romano, among whom we can count the first Jesuit cardinal, F. de Toledo. Among their ranks were some of the most courageous missionaries in India and Japan, catechists, preachers, and men of leadership. Let us not forget the man Ignatius thought the most suited to replace him, and who in fact would become the second general of the society, Diego Lainez. It is striking to note that the first theologian of the Roman College and Cardinal Toledo, the first historian and biographer of St. Ignatius, Ribeñera, the first secretary and historian of the society, Polanco, the first successor of St. Ignatius as general, Lainez, and the first well-known Jesuit philosopher, Suarez, were all of converso origin. Certain points emerge from this examination of conversos in the early society. Many conversos were attracted to this society because of their desire for a religious life learned, devout, and rooted in evangelical spirituality. Conversos were warmly welcomed into the society for an extremely brief period. Their admission in Spain peaked between 1549 and 1559, declined through the 1560s, and became almost negligible in the 1570s and 1580s. Although all conversos were subject to the same treatment by society at large, they differed among themselves on the basis of social class, national origins, and so on. In the face of strong pressure, especially in Portugal and in some circles in Spain, the society tried to deal with the problem by accepting conversos, but sending them abroad for formation. Between 1573 and 1593, intensified pressure resulted in increased restrictions on their acceptance until the congregational decree barred them completely. The question of the conversos was intertwined with the complex issue of the society's relations with the Pope and the Spanish king. The society's acceptance of Limpeza de Sangre proved that, despite its loyalty to the Pope, it remained disposed to specifically Iberian issues and prejudices. In the midst of a major constitutional struggle, at a congregation summoned to evaluate his generalate, Acquavia bowed to pressure and accepted the policy of Limpeza de Sangre for the sake of unity with the society and the preservation of normal governance. We attempt in this table to list Jesuit conversos, well aware that the society kept no record of this information and, indeed, tried to hide the data in order to avoid problems. Among those whose origin is certain or strongly asserted, which is 87, I distinguish here two groups. The first includes the Spaniards, which were 52, the second, the Portuguese, 31, and others, 4 Italians. So this is really important right here. The author gives charts of everyone that he suspects of having been a converso, and we will read through these charts, and you will notice the absence of the name Loyola. Loyola is not in these charts, so This chapter has nothing to do, and that's the end of the chapter, by the way, too. After these charts, there's no more. There's no studies after this. This begins the new chapter here. There's no studies saying Loyola was from a Jewish family. They don't exist. So anyways, here we go. Now these pages are sideways. You'll just have to bear with me here. I'm going to just tilt my head and read the names off. Okay, Jose de Acosta. I'm just going to read the last names. Acosta, 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 Alcazar, Baptista, Castro, 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 Crianta, Duenes, 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 Ferrer, 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 Gomez, Higuera, Geronimo, Lionez, 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 Luarte, Luarte, Luarte. Okay, and right there, that's where Ignatius's name would have been if he was suspected of being Jewish, and it's not there. Oliveira, Palma, 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 Perja, Pisa, Polanco, 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 Ramon, Rhodes, Ribaniera, Roman, Santander, Santofima, Suarez, Suarez, Turreco, Toledo, Tolosa, Vasquez, Vilda, Avila, and now the Portuguese. Well, you get the point. Those were the Spanish ones, and Loyola was not included in them. But, alright, whatever. I'll just continue reading. Alameda, Alvarez, Aricho, Bello, Castro, Diaz, Eleno, Ferrandez, Figueroa, Gomez, Henriques, Lopez, Mendez, Mentuano, Narbona, Noberga, Pinerho, Pinto, Posavino, Quadros, Rodriguez, Sanchez, Sandre, Dos Santos, Simeoez, Tavora, Torres, Vaz, Viega, and that's it. Okay, so nothing in there about the studies that Loyola was Jewish, so this is debunked. And now I will touch also on Robert Merrick's book, Jesuit Order as a Synagogue of Jews. And let's see. First, let's search for Marano. And these are the crypto Jews. Remember, Marano is the crypto Jew. It's the same thing, not the same thing as a converso. Oh, I have to search here. Okay, 29 results for Marano. Yep, that's irrelevant. Nothing. Nope, irrelevant. This is just about the semantics of the term Marano. More relevant citations. More semantics. Citations. And semantics. More semantics. Irrelevant citation. This is someone accusing the Jesuits of being founded by Marranos, but he's wrong because there's nothing about that. Yes, this was the father of this Jesuit provincial said to his son, "Oh, why do you want to join that? It's just a bunch of Jews." And that's it. Okay, and let's be comprehensive. Let's search crypto Jew. The Inquisition had accused Loyola of being a crypto Jew. Doesn't mean he was. There are no sources saying he was. Okay, this is talking about Loyola. Some authors have also suggested that Loyola's metanoia was, okay, I believe that means his attracting his his acceptance of Jews, basically, and wanting to accept the Jews into the Jesuits. His metanoia was due to his lack of contact with Jews. This might be true if one does not take into consideration crypto-Jews and conversos who were commonly still considered Jews. Loyola was born just before 1492, the terminus post quem no Jews were allowed in Spain. So it's saying that because Loyola grew up with Jews, then this prior statement isn't really true. Okay? Irrelevant citation. So this is talking about, let's see, Ribinera also refutes the accusations that the Memorialistas movement was composed of Jesuits of Jewish origin, for which they would have been punished by the 1593 decree. To the contrary, he stresses the leader of this group of Perturbantoros, Hebreo, was considered pure, and many converso Jesuits at any rate showed that they were very faithful and the true sons of our Father and of the society. The people who initiated major turmoil in the society, continues Ribinero, were not of Jewish stock, and even if they were, it would not suffice to punish them with this kind of decree, for we have to remember that among those people in the society we find the most excellent men in sainthood, letters, prudence, and of rare gifts, like Romano, Guzman, Ribinera. Like Guzman, Ribinera is surprised by the lineage obsession in Spain, while elsewhere this issue is non-existent. For example, in Rome, where a great Dominican preacher, Alexander, who converted from Judaism, operates with no obstacle. Consequently, the honor of the society and of Spain is compromised, for the Italians consider it entirely Jewish or crypto-Jewish. This bias undermines the society's union, for its members look at one another as enemies. Okay, that's just their opinion. And irrelevant citation. Okay, so I just showed that there's nothing saying that Loyola was a Marrano, nothing saying that anyone in the entire Society of Jesus was a Marrano or a crypto-Jew. There's just baseless accusations made by certain people, and that's all they are, is baseless accusations. There's no evidence for any of this. So now I'm going to cover all bases here. We're going to look at every single reference to Loyola, and there's not going to be one which says he was converso. Well, you know what? There's 297 results. I've already looked through this. I don't really think I need to show this. There's no other sources which would say that Loyola was Jewish. I've studied this issue. Um, I don't really feel like going through 297 different references to Loyola. That's quite a bit, and that would make this video really long. So, yeah, I'm going to end the video here. So yeah, this propagandist article from Redefining God is just trash, and this section right here is not true. This sentence that this chapter reveals that several studies have found the society's founder and its first superior general Loyola came from a converso family is false. There's nothing in that chapter to that effect. And so the Jesuits have just, I assume, lied about that. Yeah. So, thank you for watching. I hope you can use this and my other videos to refute this nonsense that Jews have controlled the Jesuits or whatever the neo-Nazis' persuasion is. Okay, so thank you, and Lord bless. Goodbye.